Hello, lovely. This is Into the Hen House, a podcast for moms with littles. We are joining our voices to a revolution of remembrance. And as mothers, we are rising together and choosing to live, birth, and mother from a place of internally sourced power and deep connection. Join us on this journey as we dive into topics of mindful and intuitive living and mothering, healthy and sovereign living, as well as the often taboo topic of birth trauma, both healing and preventing it. We are your hosts, Andrea,
Caitlin,
and Chantal.
And if you're ready, it's time to jump into the hen house. Welcome back, lovely. I'm so glad you're here. Today is an episode that I want to talk about. I'm going to call it books and boobies. I believe, I don't know if breastfeeding celebration week or month, I don't know what it is, honestly, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in the episode because there was one fact that I find really interesting that I didn't really see shared anywhere in what I had seen kind of during the week where there was a lot of posting about that. So I'm going to share that later in the week, and I'm going to talk about a couple of different books that I've been reading that are quite interesting and that have different components that kind of piqued my interest. So the first book that kind of started my little reading frenzy lately, I actually heard about on a different podcast, on the 1,000 Hours Outside podcast, I think is where I heard about it. And the book is called The Collapse of Parenting. And what kind of interested me at the time, which triggered me to buy the book, was the author who was being interviewed was talking about technology and some of the problems that are arising with children because of technology, and the importance of really prioritizing the parent-child relationship and the parent-child connection, like making sure that that is really, really prominent and really solid, and you want to start doing that kind of as early as possible. And he was kind of saying that he's of the opinion that that makes a big difference for kids. And so that was kind of the book that I started with. Now, it ended up being a little bit of a different book than I was necessarily expecting it to be, which triggered some other thoughts and questions for me. But there were certain elements of this book that I did really like. So I'm going to share a few of those with you, and then I'm going to tell you the part that kind of made me go, huh? And which triggered my next book purchase and my next book purchase. So Leonard Sachs, who is the author of this particular book, he is a medical doctor. I believe has been in family practice somewhere in the US for, I don't know, like 20, 30-ish years, for a long time, like basically almost my whole life. Maybe not quite my whole life, maybe my sister's whole life. But anyways, for a long time. And he really was noticing in his practice how there's been certain cultural changes that have really happened over the last, let's say, 3 decades, 2 decades, 3 decades kind of thing. And one is kind of what he is calling the culture of disrespect. And for anyone who has spent any time online, you know what that is. And he's talking a lot about how children and teenagers have so much less respect for adults than they used to, how they have so much less respect for their parents than they used to, and how just in general the language and the actions, it's very, even in the school systems. And if you talk to teachers here, I actually talked to a teacher in the city that I live, and he worked in the public school system, became a teacher maybe only in the last 10 years or so, and he had said it's just wild. One, the neglect that some of these kids face is insane. but two, the disrespect and the disrespect that exists in the public school system, how it's to teach is such a challenging job, and there's just this pervasive culture that is very difficult to work with and very difficult to manage, and it makes it very challenging. So that's what this teacher had been sharing with me, and which ties in with what this author is also saying, is that there's this culture of disrespect that has emerged amongst young people today. Now, me personally, I would argue that the culture of disrespect is far more widespread than simply young people. And I guess it depends how you define young. It may be much more prevalent with children and teenagers right now. That's a possibility. But I do believe that the culture of disrespect, if we want to call it that, begins with the parents. Because I have heard, anyone who posts something online, like, you know that other mothers and other parents and other adults can be some of the most disrespectful people when you disagree with an opinion. So I think the culture of disrespect almost ties in with like a cancel culture, or a you disagree with me, so I'm gonna yell at you, or you disagree with me, you're stupid, or you disagree with me, you're a bad person, or it's culture has become very polarized. It's like, if I don't agree with you on 100% of issues, then there needs to be like a smackdown almost. And a lot of this happens online. And so if children are also online and sharing things, there can be a lot of really, really rude, really sometimes obscene things that are said online, very not complimentary, very not respectful. So the culture of disrespect permeates much deeper than only children. And I think as parents, we have to keep ourselves in check all the time and in front of our children, so that we're actually teaching them to have respectful disagreements. We're teaching them that you can disagree with someone and still be their friend. Because as someone very astutely once said to me, no two people with two different brains are going to agree on everything. So there's always going to be, in humanity, disagreement. Now, some people, you may say, now you do you over there and I'll do me over here, and let's just not. And that's okay too. But again, I think within this culture of disrespect, children have to be taught how to have civil disagreement, how to say, hey, I don't agree with that choice. I don't think that's a smart choice, but that doesn't mean that that's a bad person. That doesn't mean that they're stupid. And I've heard many, many mothers speak like this in front of their children, and it becomes a problem. And in person as well, though online, online is just a free-for-all. And everyone knows that, again, like sometimes other moms will be the biggest bees, and you can fill in the word. But it just exists. Sometimes parents will respond in the most disrespectful ways. And so I think as parents, we need to keep ourselves in check. So I did find that part really interesting. And speaking of technology, he had some really interesting viewpoints on technology. And this was part of what I found really interesting in the podcast when I first heard him speak. And it's actually a really interesting chapter, really going into how technology has changed, how giving a phone to a baby to soothe the baby or to distract the baby or a really young child, how that can contribute to fragility, like mental and emotional fragility, which is talked about also in the second book that I read as well, which is Good Inside. That's actually something that they both have in common, is talking about when you give a phone to a small child, you're letting them know, oh, I can't handle your big emotion. Here, be distracted. Here, be soothed. And it creates an avoidance, which often makes the issue bigger. And so I found that really interesting. The other things that he brought up about technology, and there's benefits to technology, there's risks to technology. I think we all know that social media has, in adolescent girls, it has some pretty detrimental effects. This is just kind of a thing, and a lot of that is tied to body image and potential targeting for strange diets or things like that. Spoke about how the symptoms of ADHD are, they mimic, sleep deprivation mimics the symptoms of ADHD. And so he believes that a lot of children are being diagnosed with ADHD and being put on medication when really the bigger issue is that they're not sleeping. And some of this can be because they have technology in their bedroom, and they may, even though they're in their room for 8, 9, 10 hours, they may be up hours of the night doing something on their phone and therefore not getting enough sleep. And there was a really interesting article that he cited that actually talked about how having technology, a computer, a tablet, a phone in your bedroom at night, even if it's turned off, like powered down, still somehow interferes with sleep. And that's really fascinating. And so there's definitely something to be said for going a little bit old-fashioned for alarm clocks and things like that. But I found that really interesting. And he also points out that technology and what we have to be aware of as parents today is very different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The technology has advanced so much, and there can be a lot of things. When we give a child a smartphone, they're going to have access to a lot of things that we may not even think of or think that they need. Like putting like an app tracker on your child's phone to see what they're downloading, or a parental control filter. There are apps that are designed, it looks like a calculator. You go, oh, my kid downloaded a calculator, but inside it will have, a photo vault that you can share with all kinds of people, and things like that. So there's, he had made a joke in the book, like, that's very 2005 of you, or very 2010 of you. But to be aware that technology is moving so fast, and our kids are probably more ahead of the curve than we are. Now, again, you may have really young kids like me and go, technology is not such a big issue right now. However, again, most kids by 5 or 10 are getting pretty proficient on technology. So even if, let's say for, my child who's almost 2, it's not necessarily that far off that she could start being exposed to technology. And so I think it's just going forward, I think no matter what age your kids are, it's an important conversation to be aware of and to have with your partner, and to consider just the advances in technology, and to kind of plan your risk management, technological risk management appropriately based on different factors. And so I found that really interesting. And that part was specifically interesting. He also talked about technology and specifically screens, more so content of the how content, right? And how in a lot of programming, there's not only disrespect being shown, but there's also an absence of parents. There's an absence of parental figures, or the parental figures are ridiculous. And so he really focused a lot of the book on talking about prioritizing the parent-child dynamic and prioritizing that. And that was something also consistent with the book Good Inside, of really prioritizing the connection between parent and child, because when you have that, it buffers out a lot of other things. And so I really liked that part of the book as well. Something very interesting that he brought up in the book, which he also brought up during the podcast, and he calls it kind of like the middle class, I don't know, idea structure or whatever, middle class something. And that is, there's this idea that we have been given and often give to our kids of, you go to school and you do well in school so that you can get into college, and a good college, a good college. And, you do well in college so you can get a good job. You get a good job so you can make money, and this is supposed to equal happiness. That's kind of the story, right? This is doing all of these things. You're supposed to get there, and then you're supposed to be happy. That's supposed to dictate happiness. And he had said in his findings that's, and based on the research, it's really quite false. And what is a better predictor, according to some studies, of happiness is conscientiousness. And conscientiousness, according to him, is broken down into, and it's a skill. It's a character trait that gets developed. It's not necessarily something you're born with, but it's a development of self-control, of, let me check. Where did I write this down? Here we go. Self-control, honesty, and reliability. And in cultivating these traits, you develop conscientiousness. And in developing conscientiousness, it's a greater predictor of happiness. Now, I would also argue that finding your authentic self and being able to express your authentic self and live a life that feels very aligned to your authentic self and your soul purpose and all of that, I think that would also be a huge contributor to happiness. And that's actually something that comes up in the book that I'm currently reading, that I've actually just started and haven't finished, but we may do an episode on that one later. But, so I think, and ultimately we say, okay, well, what do we want for our kids? We do want them to be happy. We want them to have emotional resilience. We want them to feel equipped to succeed in life. And there can definitely be different perspectives on how to achieve that. And I believe that creating a security where you are your child's safe place, it gives them a lot of room to fly later on and to spread their wings, and offering them a very safe container and a deep connection where they feel like they can come to you no matter what. I think it's a very important piece. And I think, parents, it's a funny thing because it's something you're not required to have any training to do. And yet it's just hands down the most important job of a lifetime. It's such an important work. And we're not in a lack of information, in the time and place that we live in. We're not at a lack of information. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, yes, investigating, yes, reading things that interest you, taking into consideration different perspectives, but also doing what feels right to you. And I think creating a very loving, supportive relationship with your child, there's nothing that's really more important than that. Now, there's a lot of theories about how to do that. And so that's kind of where my came in with this particular book, because he took he took a lot of swings at the whole idea of gentle parenting, and also mindful parenting and intentional parenting. And that was curious to me, because I have considered that to be, generally speaking, a pretty good thing, and definitely not everyone's way, but in general, a pretty good thing. And I've seen it online a lot since then as well, of these swings at gentle parenting, talking about how it's very permissive, how it's allows children to rule the house, and that there's no boundaries and there's no containment, that children are just given at a very young age, they're told to make all their choices, and there's they're just allowed to make every choice before they're developmentally ready to do it. And I'm sitting here going, I agree that children, I think that they should be given some choices that are developmentally appropriate. I don't think that they should be given every choice. For most kids, if you say, what do you want to eat? And they say ice cream, and you give them ice cream every single time they say ice cream, okay, that's not going to be a very healthy choice for them, and they may or may not be at a developmentally mature enough place to make a healthy choice for themselves, right? But I just thought, I didn't think that that was what gentle parenting was. That wasn't my understanding of it. I thought that was more about not having punitive punishment, and rather working on teaching and connection, and focusing on that first. And so this is what triggered my purchase of the second book, which I've actually heard a lot about, which was Good Inside, which is not labeled anywhere as a gentle parenting book, but that's generally has been my understanding, that generally it's a gentle parenting book. And I loved the book. It was great. And, but again, in there, like she talks about, you want to be a very sturdy parent. You need to create a container. You need to enforce what you ask for. You still get to, I like how she talks about things. She's like, let's talk about jobs. We have my job, we have your job as the kid, my job. And I liked the part about eating. Okay, this was a good example. And she said, it's my job as the parent to make the food, to choose what's on the menu for tonight. And then it's the child's job to decide what of what's offered and how much they wish to eat. That's their choice. But it's my choice what I want to offer the child. So I could offer them a meal of entirely vegetables, and then they get to choose what of those vegetables that I've offered they want to eat. Or I could, do something else. But I like that. It's, and I'm going, that doesn't sound overly permissive to me. So it was very interesting. And I feel like perhaps a lot of people are misunderstanding what gentle parenting is, because I think that gentle parenting is not intended as a way to get out of parenting, to push parenting onto someone else or onto your child. It's that's not the intention of it. The intention of it is to primarily really focus on the parent-child relationship, and in that connection, teach your child, about right and wrong. It's about modeling what is a healthier behavior. It's about having honest discussions. It's about being present with your kids. It's about giving them the attention that they need, and it's about seeing them. So I like a couple of things that she said. and this is one I resonate with so much. Like, I believe this is so important, that you have to see your kids as good inside. And this can apply to anyone, all relationships, that ultimately, despite whatever behavior may be on the surface, inside that person is a good person. And that includes for you, even in crazy moments, even in moments you yell, you are a good person. And that was kind of one of her other tenets of this book, is two things can be true. And so, there can be a behavior that's not adaptive, that's not ideal, that needs to be stopped. And there's still a good person inside. And they're needing some extra love, and they're trying to communicate something. So, maybe I get overwhelmed and I yell. Okay, well, yes, that's true. And these other elements of things are true too. And I like that. It kind of gives a broader perspective to it, which helps us all have a little bit more compassion for ourselves. I honestly, in reading the book, I go, wow, it could be applied to relationships far outside the parent-child relationship as well, and could be, it applies to all kinds of relationships. And I'm going, well, what an interesting way of doing it. And so it's a great book in coming from that perspective and offering really salient advice for different situations. And she says, sometimes the boundary is what you're going to do. So it's not saying, stop doing that. I asked you to stop doing that. And then yelling at the kid or whatever. It's saying, I can't let you hit someone. I'm going to pick you up and move you out of the way. That's my job. My job is to keep you safe. My job is to create boundaries and make it clear. And sometimes that means turning the TV off and saying, hi, I said we need to turn the TV off. Therefore, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to turn the TV off, and now we're going to get ready for bed. And you can be upset. You can feel whatever you feel, and the boundary still holds. So it's more so allows room for the feeling. And I really enjoyed that book. And again, I would not call myself an expert on gentle parenting. There could be other books that talk about gentle parenting that do suggest a much more permissive way of doing things. That wasn't my impression from this book, which had kind of been my little internal question mark. But anyway, so that was kind of what triggered my reading and my little reading frenzy, though I read a lot anyways. I love to read. But so let me jump and talk about research for a little bit. And so one aspect of research that I have found a lot, like if you just search PubMed, you'll find a bunch of articles on this. It's pretty consistent, is we know that children across the world, and definitely in the US, are very unhealthy. We have a very sick generation of kids. It's really not even up for debate. That just is what's happening. Nearly everyone is acknowledging that that's kind of the case these days. Why is definitely a much more up for debate kind of thing, but we don't need to go there. But one thing that I have found in regards to obesity in children is that consistently babies who are breastfed for at least 6 months have significantly, it's like a huge reduction in any chance of having any obesity in childhood. And I find that very interesting, and it's consistent across so many peer-reviewed articles. And that was something that did not come up in anyone's posting during breastfeeding week or month. I don't know, maybe we're still in it. And I find that really, really interesting. And, you know, it's definitely something to consider because childhood obesity is, it's a problem. It creates a much less healthy life for the child. It sets them up for a lot of potential health issues going into adulthood. And to consider breastfeeding at least for 6 months, I think is a really important choice. And this would be one reason to consider that. Now, one of the other findings that research consistently comes up with is sleep. Children who do not sleep enough have much more issues with obesity in childhood. So that was another factor that came up quite a bit. And I find that really fascinating. Now, I want to talk about something because I recently did, it honestly, something that was said to me a long time ago, but it's kind of been twigging in my brain for a while that I wanted to look it up. So this week I spent some time digging into peer-reviewed literature to find out what this was. And so this is something I want to make a note of in regards to research. Okay, research is wonderful. I think it can give a lot of information. However, I think we have to understand that in many, many cases, research is not complete because it depends what questions were asked, what they were looking for, what did they compare it to. And so here's the example. Okay, so I was told that at the time I was giving birth by the OBGYN that delayed cord clamping past 1 minute, there was no significant effect or change. There was no significant difference for outcomes for babies. And I had always been taught, and it shows up in books from different midwives. As a chiropractor, I've been exposed to pretty holistic people, a different kind of perspective on things. And I had always believed, and had I had a vaginal birth, this would have been my hope, that delayed cord clamping isn't just waiting a minute, it's waiting until the cord stops pulsing so that the baby actually gets all of their cord blood, and that there's a lot of importance to this. So then this OBGYN is saying, the most I can give you is a minute. I won't do anything more than that. I ended up having a C-section, which was very unfortunate, but was the way it was. And so again, in that situation, I wasn't going to argue it. It's a very different ball game. It's harder to predict things. You know, you can't necessarily wait 10, 15, 20 minutes, a half hour in that kind of a situation. It's not possible. But I was very curious, and I have remained very curious because I said, nothing past 1 minute makes any difference. What other time frames have they actually studied? And so I went in and did just a couple hours of looking at research. So I would not call it a complete review of the literature on this topic by any means. However, I did look relatively thoroughly. And here's the thing that I found. Most studies on delayed cord clamping, and delayed is 1 minute is considered delayed. If it's not immediate, it's delayed. So 1 minute, that was what most studies studied. Benefits of delayed cord clamping, 1 minute. There was a couple of studies that studied and asked the question of, is there a difference between 1 minute and 75 seconds, 60 seconds, or 75 seconds? So do you see what I'm saying? So he's coming to me and saying there's no benefits to delayed cord clamping past 1 minute. The research has cleared that up entirely. And yet, to the best of what I could find, there are no studies, or extremely limited studies, ones I didn't find, that test anything beyond 75 seconds. So it's a 15-second gap. And they're saying, oh, there's no discernible difference. And so I think when we talk about research, we have to understand that there can be gaps. It's not a perfect system. We have to understand the potential failings of research so that we can have a better relationship with research. And that is assuming that research is done with integrity, and it is not always done with integrity because people are not always very integrity based. And recently there was also a study on Alzheimer's. It was a groundbreaking study on Alzheimer's like 20 years ago. I'm talking about amyloid plaques that now has come out and been found that the data was fudged and it was fraudulent. And yet for 20 years, all of the research has focused purely on that to the detriment of all other theories and all other research. And so I tend to believe that that's not the norm. However, we have to understand that research is not, it's not 100% of a perfect answer. I think it begins to answer a lot of questions. And I do really enjoy research. However, I think when utilizing research, we have to understand the gaps and take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt and say, what did they compare it to? What question did they ask? Because in my case, if I didn't have the information I had going into it, I'm going, apparently they've say, 30 minutes doesn't make any difference. Of course, they must have tested that. They must have tested all the other time frames. And yet all they've done is said, there's no discernible difference between 60 seconds and 75 seconds. No one, to my knowledge, has ever checked to see if there's a discernible difference between 60 seconds and 30 minutes. And that remains kind of a question mark, right? So definitely some gaps in research, but even so, I still love the research on breastfeeding and obesity. And I'm a big fan of breastfeeding in general. So happy celebration of breastfeeding week/month. I think the week is over, but month slash, if you're in it, then every day is a celebration of you, because every drop of breast milk that your child receives, according to me, is a beautiful gift. And on that note, I will close out, and I'm so excited for our season finale. We are going to be recording it later this evening, and it is going to be phenomenal. And I'm really excited. We have a really special guest who's joining from Australia, and I think you're gonna love it. So definitely stay tuned for next week, which will be our season 4 finale. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you are loving this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe and leave us a review. Both of these really help the show. As you go out into the world this week, know that we are sending you so much love and wishing you a wonderful and beautiful day, and we will see you back here soon.